Besties, you are not ready for this because what just exploded in court is beyond shocking. Blake Lively thought she had everything under control. But now new declarations, new emails, and new evidence have surfaced, and they could flip this entire case upside down, leaving Hollywood stunned and fans speechless. So buckle up because the truth that has been buried is about to be dragged into the light. From the very beginning, this entire saga has felt like a slow-burning fire hidden beneath the surface, with whispers of betrayal secrets exchanged behind closed doors, and the constant clash of egos that only grow louder as more evidence comes pouring out. And now with the shocking declaration from James, the reporter, who has suddenly become the center of the storm, the story has transformed from a legal chess match into something resembling a Hollywood thriller, where every piece of paper, every email, every text message could alter the fate of powerful names involved. The way this has unfolded is nothing short of astonishing, because at first the narrative being pushed was that Leslie Sloan was unfairly dragged into a lawsuit simply for doing her job as a publicist. But the moment declarations and emails began to surface, it became impossible to deny that more was going on than anyone had admitted. Because long before Jed Wallace was ever hired, before the Daily Mail even published their most damning exclusives, there were already documented conversations suggesting that Sloan was strategically feeding information to shape a very particular story against Justin Baldoni and Wayfarer. The implications of that are staggering, because it suggests a premeditated smear campaign carried out at a level that most ordinary viewers could never imagine, with coordination between a publicist, a powerful actress, and certain media outlets. Now, when Leslie came forward demanding attorney's fees, she positioned herself as a victim of a frivolous, baseless lawsuit. But the problem is that in order for a judge to agree with her, she has to prove the lawsuit was filed in bad faith, and that is where the contradictions begin to tear holes in her story, because the newly filed declaration from James both supports her claims in some ways and undercuts them in others. He asserts that he never reported sexual assault allegations against Baldoni, and yet there are text chains and emails that tell a far more complicated story, one where ambiguity and half-statements have been weaponized by both sides to serve their own version of the truth in one breath. Leslie claims the entire lawsuit was built around a single ambiguous text message. In another breath, evidence shows repeated communications where she allegedly fed narratives about creative differences, tensions on set, and personal conflicts designed to make Baldoni look like the aggressor, the villain, the director who shut women out of their own story. These contradictions matter because when a judge looks at motions for attorney's fees, credibility is everything, and right now credibility is slipping through Leslie's hands like sand. The irony here is almost cinematic, because in her attempt to use James as the ultimate witness, the smoking gun that proves she was unfairly targeted, she may have actually reopened the door for Wayfarer and Baldoni to respond with their own mountain of evidence, including emails James himself sent to his editors, stating point blank that Leslie had indeed been his source for several explosive stories that ended up shaping the negative press surrounding Blake and Justin's film. This isn't just legal maneuvering, it is reputation warfare, and the stakes could not be higher because Hollywood careers and multi-million-dollar projects are tied directly to how this case is perceived in the public eye. Think about the optics for a moment. Blake Lively positioning herself as the face of empowerment, insisting she had no part in the smear, while her own longtime publicist is accused of planting stories with one of the most notorious tabloids in the world, the Daily Mail. If the court finds even the slightest hint that Sloan's actions crossed a line, then the narrative Blake has fought so hard to protect could come crashing down like a house of cards. And this is why the sudden declaration is both shocking and suspicious. Because why now? Why would James suddenly clarify old text messages nearly a year later? Why would he suddenly side with Leslie in such a dramatic fashion after already admitting to others that she was a driving force behind the smear narrative that surrounded Baldoni? This is where the suspense deepens, because it appears James may be playing both sides, caught in the middle of two powerful forces, one demanding loyalty and one threatening exposure if he fails to cooperate. And while that might sound like speculation, the pattern of shifting statements suggests a man under immense pressure trying desperately to avoid being labeled a liar or worse, perjurer in the eyes of the court. The emotional core of this drama lies in the fact that careers, reputations, and personal lives are all being gambled away on the words of a reporter who admits he was being used for exclusives that garnered worldwide attention. And the fact that Leslie is now trying to leverage those same admissions as proof of her innocence feels almost surreal. But here's where the plot twists again, because Leslie is insisting that the entire dismissal of the case against her proves bad faith. Yet the judge never once ruled the case was frivolous or malicious. Instead, the judge made clear that because Baldoni is a public figure, the burden of proof was higher. They had to demonstrate malice with concrete evidence, and at the pleading stage, they simply could not. That is a legal technicality, not a declaration of innocence, which makes her motion for attorney's fees feel more like a desperate gamble than a guaranteed win. But desperation can drive people to take risks. And that is exactly what seems to be happening here, because if the judge denies her motion, not only will she be on the hook for millions in unpaid legal bills, but the very documents she is now dragging back into the spotlight could be turned against her in devastating fashion. Because as Wayfarer prepares their response, they will almost certainly use this opportunity to present every email, every communication that demonstrates Leslie's active role in shaping the media narrative, and once that enters the court record, it will no longer be rumor or speculation. It will be evidence with the power to sway both legal outcomes and public opinion. And once public opinion shifts, in Hollywood there is no going back. What makes this even more dramatic is the way Blake herself has stepped into the conversation. Because while she has insisted she was never part of a smear campaign, her public statements to outlets like the New York Times have fueled the perception that someone within her inner circle was working overtime to shape coverage in her favor. And as her publicist, Leslie's fingerprints are all over those efforts. So the looming question now is not just whether Sloan will win her attorney's fees, but whether Blake herself will be able to distance her image from the fallout of whatever comes next. Because once the court forces both sides to put all their cards on the table, the truth will not just belong to the lawyers, it will belong to the public. And in the age of viral headlines and trending scandals, no amount of spin can erase what is written in black and white in sworn declarations and email records. So as the tension builds, as the stakes climb higher, this story feels less like a legal battle and more like the climactic act of a film, where every character's motives are being revealed one by one, and the audience is left on the edge of their seat, wondering who will emerge vindicated and who will be left exposed. The unraveling of this saga feels almost operatic, because every new revelation adds another layer of intrigue and deceit, and it becomes increasingly difficult to separate the truth from the narrative that each side is desperately trying to cement. As reality, and as Leslie Sloan continues her relentless push for attorney's fees, the contradictions in her arguments become more glaring. With each filing, she insists that the heart of the lawsuit was built around a single ambiguous text message. Yet anyone who has reviewed the documents knows it was far more than that. It was an entire pattern of behavior, an interconnected web of leaked stories, planted narratives, and carefully timed media cycles that all pointed back to her as a central figure, orchestrating coverage in a way that would benefit Blake while simultaneously isolating and vilifying Justin Baldoni. The problem for Sloan is that her insistence on rewriting the past only serves to highlight the inconsistencies, and when a witness like James changes his tune so drastically, the credibility of the entire operation begins to collapse, because courts are not blind to shifting narratives. In fact, juries are specifically instructed that if a witness lies or changes their story about one issue, they are free to disregard their testimony entirely. And that is where the danger lies, because James has admitted in writing that Sloan provided him with information used in published stories, and now he is standing beside her as if none of that ever occurred. It is a contradiction that could come back to haunt both of them. Because once Wayfarer responds with their trove of documents showing email chains, editor communications, and more, the court will be faced with two irreconcilable stories. One that paints Sloan as a scapegoat, unfairly dragged into a lawsuit, and another that portrays her as a mastermind, carefully manipulating the press in service of her client's narrative. And Hollywood is watching every move, because this is no longer just about a lawsuit. This is about reputations. And reputations in Hollywood are currency more valuable than money. The public image of Blake Lively, carefully curated over decades as America's sweetheart, the glamorous star, the loyal wife, the adored mother, could unravel if the perception takes hold that she weaponized her publicist to destroy a collaborator and then hid behind technicalities to escape accountability. And for Justin Baldoni, whose career has already weathered storms, this battle represents a fight for vindication, because every time his name is dragged through the mud in headlines suggesting abuse, harassment, or creative sabotage, it chips away at his credibility, not only as a filmmaker, but as a man trusted to tell sensitive and empowering stories about women. If the evidence proves that Sloan knowingly spread false or misleading narratives, the backlash will not just land on her shoulders, it will splash onto Blake, staining her brand. At the very moment she needs it most, because the entertainment industry is ruthless and fickle. And once executives believe you are too controversial, too toxic to sell their projects, they turn away without hesitation. Imagine the boardrooms at streaming giants and studios where executives are quietly asking themselves whether investing millions in a Blake Lively project is worth the risk. If her name becomes synonymous with manipulation lawsuits and scandal, that is the real danger here. Because Hollywood does not forgive easily when dollars are at stake, and it does not matter how many red carpets you command, or how many blockbuster hits you once had. The court of public opinion is unforgiving, and in the digital age, every headline, every leaked email becomes immortalized online where it can never be erased. The suspense grows heavier, because Leslie's decision to push this new declaration is almost daring Wayfarer to strike back with full force. And when they do, the results could be devastating. Not only legally, but publicly. Because the moment their evidence enters the record, it becomes fair game for the press. And once reporters get their hands on new documents, you can guarantee that the narrative will shift again. Overnight, the irony is that Sloan herself was once accused of weaponizing the media, and now she risks having the media turn against her, as they feast on the contradictions in her filings and declarations. The deeper question, though, is why would she take such a gamble if she already had a motion for attorney's fees pending? Why risk alienating the judge by appearing desperate or repetitive? Perhaps it is fear. Perhaps she believes that the motion she already filed is not strong enough to secure the millions she is demanding, and that without this fresh declaration, her chances of winning reimbursement are slim. Desperation makes people reckless, and recklessness in the legal arena often leads to disaster. Consider how the judge might view this if he perceives that Sloan is attempting to relitigate issues already dismissed, or that she is rehashing old evidence under the guise of something new. He may grow impatient and dismiss her arguments outright. Worse yet, he may allow Wayfarer to fully respond, in which case all of the evidence Sloan hoped would remain in the shadows could burst into the spotlight in ways that damage not only her case, but her career and Blake's as well, because the truth is that this case has already exposed more than either of them wanted. The revelation that Sloan admitted to weaponizing sensitive information about people perceived as threats to her clients is damning enough. But once you add in the timing of her communications, with James, the puzzle becomes clear that the smear campaign was not an accident or a misunderstanding, but a deliberate strategy. The suspense becomes unbearable when you realize that Sloan's entire reputation as a Hollywood power publicist is on the line, because if a court even hints that she acted in bad faith, it could destroy her career. No client will want to hire a publicist who may drag them into court battles or create scandals too dangerous to survive in the industry. The emotional weight of this saga is staggering, because behind the glamorous facade of Hollywood, you see the cutthroat reality where loyalty is conditional and careers can be destroyed in an instant. Sloan thought she was untouchable. She believed her decades of experience, her Rolodex of contacts, and her alliance with A-list stars would shield her. But in chasing after attorney's fees, she may have triggered the very downfall she feared, because once Wayfarer files their response, every skeleton in her closet could be dragged into the light. And there is nothing more terrifying for a publicist than having their private methods exposed in a public court record. The paradox of this moment is that Sloan is claiming censorship and victimhood, while simultaneously being accused of silencing and smearing others through media manipulation. And when both narratives collide in a courtroom, only one can survive, which is why the stakes are higher than ever and the drama is only escalating. Because as every document is filed, as every motion is argued, the truth becomes harder to hide, and the Hollywood elite who once whispered about this scandal behind closed doors are now forced to confront it publicly, wondering who will emerge unscathed and who will fall from grace. And as the storm around Blake Lively deepened, it was no longer just about a legal fight or some celebrity gossip. It became a mirror of how power operates in Hollywood and how carefully constructed reputations can collapse in a matter of days. Once the cracks began to show and what we witnessed was a collapse in real time played out across headlines, leaked court documents, and whispered confessions that poured like fuel onto an already raging fire. One moment she was the polished star, who represented glamour style and control the next. She was being dragged into the muck with accusations flying in every direction, and every attempt her team made to spin the narrative seemed only to make things worse as more leaks emerged. Walls around her fortress of secrecy began to crumble, exposing every contradiction, every private remark that cut against her carefully curated public image, and when her legal filings were dissected, line by line, by analysts, commentators, and even her former supporters. The world saw something she had tried to keep hidden for years, a pattern of manipulation, of bending the truth, of presenting herself as a victim, when in reality she had often been the aggressor, and in this moment her silence was deafening because the more she stayed quiet, the more people assumed the worst, filling the void with speculation, memes, theories, and even parodies that mocked her downfall, while her critics gleefully pointed out that she was finally being forced to answer for the games she had played behind the scenes. And yet what made this unraveling even more shocking was the cast of characters now circling her former friends' industry allies, even people from her inner circle who seemed to step back, as if afraid of being tainted by association. It was the classic Hollywood distancing maneuver where loyalty evaporates. The second controversy becomes too hot to handle, and suddenly the woman who once commanded red carpets and glowing profiles in magazines looked like an island abandoned by the very people who had once sung her praises. This isolation became more visible as days went by. Her social media fell silent, her public appearances canceled, and when photographers did catch glimpses of her, she looked like someone carrying the weight of a scandal that refused to fade, while her rivals capitalized on the moment, using it to shine brighter in comparison. And her supposed allies issued statements so carefully worded, they may as well have been admissions that they wanted no part of her drama. What was particularly brutal was how the leaked texts involving Taylor Swift amplified everything. Because if there is one thing the public does not forgive, it is betrayal of trust. Especially when that betrayal involves someone beloved like Swift, and once the screenshot surfaced, no matter the context, no matter how her team tried to spin it, the narrative stuck. Blake had mocked, belittled, and dismissed someone she once called a friend, and in a culture where authenticity is currency, this betrayal was seen as unforgivable. The internet latched onto every phrase, every sarcastic jab painting Blake as the villain, and the backlash was not just online. It seeped into mainstream media, with talk shows, magazines, and even late-night comedians making her the punchline of their monologues. Her fall from grace was now entertainment, and the public could not look away. Each new revelation felt like an episode in a scandalous series, one that blurred the line between fiction and reality. And what made it worse was that the legal battle with Justin Baldoni was still raging on, and each court filing seemed to reveal yet another layer of tension, animosity, and behind the scenes warfare that had been hidden from the public for so long now. It was all laid bare for the world to see. Emails, deposition notes, and testimony snippets became the script of her undoing, and Baldoni played his role perfectly, not with rage, but with a steady patience that made him look like the wronged party finally receiving justice. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with her increasingly erratic image, and in Hollywood, optics matter sometimes more than the truth itself. So every headline that painted him as the victim, and her as the manipulator, dug the knife deeper into her reputation. And yet, as much as this was a legal story, it was also a cultural reckoning, because Blake had long symbolized the untouchable Hollywood elite, and now seeing her dragged into the mud was for many a sign that even the powerful could fall, that even the carefully constructed walls of fame and influence could be torn down when the truth, or even the perception of truth, came crashing through. And as the weeks rolled on, the suspense only grew. What evidence would come out next? What texts? What confessions? What betrayals still lay hidden, waiting to be revealed? It was this constant anticipation that kept the public hooked, unable to look away from the train wreck of her unraveling, wondering if this was just the beginning of the end, or if somehow, against all odds, she would find a way to claw her way back into the light. The conclusion to this entire saga cannot be brushed aside with a casual shrug. It demands attention, because what we are witnessing is not simply a celebrity scandal or a courtroom headline, but a once-in-a-generation unraveling of power, manipulation, and the hidden machinery of Hollywood. Blake lively walked into this storm believing her influence, her image, and her carefully manufactured reputation would shield her from every bullet. But now the shield has cracked wide open, and behind it we see a far more complicated truth the courtroom has stripped. Away the filters, the magazine covers, and the friendly talk show appearances, and what remains is the raw struggle of a woman fighting not just for her career, but for her survival as allegation after allegation piles up, as receipts leak, as powerful voices in Hollywood shift their alliances. The reality is no longer in her control. Justin Baldoni has fought with an almost surgical precision, carefully revealing evidence in a way that both devastates his opponent and builds sympathy for himself. The public has been left with no choice but to question everything they once believed about Blake Lively, about Ryan Reynolds, about the very culture of celebrity worship. This case is about so much more than leaked texts and defamation claims. It all is about accountability. It is about what happens when the Hollywood facade collides head-on with truth, and when friends turn into enemies, when allies betray, and when secrets cannot stay hidden forever. This chapter is ending. But make no mistake, the story is far from over, because if history tells us anything, it is that the next revelation, the next bombshell, the next twist is already waiting just behind the curtain. And when it drops, Hollywood will never look the same again.